I'm going to call the meeting to order. Could we have a roll call, please?
Mr. Ackerson?
Here.
Ms. Billman? Here. Mr. Fell?
Here.
Mr. Fitch?
Here.
Mr. Hopkins?
Here.
Ms. Wadrago?
Here.
Mr. Trail?
Here.
Mr. Turner?
Here.
And Ms. Yu.
Here.
We have a quorum. We have a full house quorum. That's excellent. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay. We have the minutes from the April 19th, 2018 regular Plan Commission meeting. Moved by Mr. Turner, second by Mr. Fell. I do have two small typos in the minutes. On page 2, the second to last paragraph, after ETJ in parentheses, I think you need the word could. So it would read, Mr. Felt questioned if an architect from the extraterritorial jurisdiction area, ETJ, could serve on the proposed board. And then on the last page, the next to last paragraph, second sentence, he felt that the presenters got sidetracked, T-R-A-C-K-E-D instead of T-R-A-C-T. And I just did that to prove that I read the minutes. We'll do these minutes on a voice vote. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye. Aye. Those opposed? The minutes are approved. Any communications?
No.
We have a continued public hearing, Plan Case Number 2331 T18, request by the zoning administrator to amend the zoning ordinance to modify who may submit an application for various permits and approvals. This case is continued to the June 21st, 2018 Plan Commission meeting. Don't have any old business. We do have a new public hearing. This is Plan Case Number 2343 SU18, a request by Green Street Realty for a special use permit to establish a mixed-use retail and multifamily residential building at 1007 West University Avenue in the B3 General Business Zoning District. Mr. Garcia.
Okay, good evening. All right, so this is an application for a mixed-use residential and commercial building at 1007 West University Avenue. That's in the B3 General Business District. In the B3 district, a special use permit is required for residential uses. Obviously, it's business, so commercial is by right. So this request is really for the residential use portion of the mixed-use building. The applicant's plan is to replace the Nero Zeros building with a one-story commercial and then 4 stories of residential above that first floor. So as you can see in Exhibit A, the property is located on University Avenue between Goodwin to the west and Lincoln to the east, or I guess more precisely Harvey to the west and Gregory to the east. It's directly across the street from the Campus Circle apartments, which you'll recall that Campus Circle also received an SUP, special use permit, for a mixed-use residential and commercial building a few years back. And then nearby, along University Avenue, is mostly auto-oriented businesses. And then to the south, as you can see on this map, there's other high-density residential uses as well. And then a couple blocks to the west and to the south, off the edge of the map here, is the northern end of the University of Illinois campus. So as I mentioned, the proposed uses would be just over 1,700 square feet of commercial, and then there would be 4 stories of apartments above, and there would be space for 44 residents in those apartments. In Exhibit D, you can take a look at the site plan. So as you can see, University Avenue to the north. So access to the site would be off of University Avenue. There's also an alley on the south side, which could be used to access the site, both going in and out of the site. The commercial space is on the southwest corner of the site. And let's see, there's 30 parking spaces, which is what the zoning ordinance requires, as well as space in the covered parking area for 14 bicycles to park. Let's see. So the parking does encroach into the front yard, so it would need to be screened per our landscape ordinance, or per our zoning ordinance landscape requirements. So that's the first floor, and then each subsequent floor, so the second through fifth floors would be, let me zoom in a little bit here. So you see you have a series of mostly two-bedroom apartments, and then each floor would have one bedroom apartment as well. I do want to point out that the site plans that were submitted are preliminary, as they often are in these cases. And for the final plans, staff would recommend that a landscaping plan be submitted and adhered to, and that the parking that's below the building be screened with a wall, so that it's not like those, the buildings on stilts that you sometimes see. And the applicant is amenable to those conditions and has indicated that the plan was never to build it on stilts, just as a preliminary elevations, just to show the building massing and such. So for the special use permit requirements, there are 3 requirements that the Plan Commission should consider when making a decision on this case. The first is that the proposed use is conducive to the public convenience. This area is it's commercial, and it also has a lot of high-density residential, so this use would be compatible with the surrounding areas. Adding more residents to the area would be a benefit to the surrounding businesses. Also, it's very close to the university, and it's on the south side of University Avenue, which would be beneficial to potential tenants who, especially those who go to the university or who work at the university. Criteria number 2 is that the proposed use will not be injurious or detrimental to the district or the public welfare. We don't think that this would be detrimental to the district or public welfare. As I mentioned, the uses are highly compatible with the surrounding area. And being on the south side of University Avenue, again, it would be convenient for university access. And finally, the third requirement is that the proposed use conforms to the regulations and standards and preserves the character of the area and the B3 district. The site plan meets all of our development regulations for the B3 district. It also matches the character of the area and of the B3 district in general. Now, the Plan Commission can add conditions in special use permit cases. So as I mentioned earlier, staff recommends that there be a landscape plan that's submitted and adhered to, that they screen the parking under the building with a wall, and then also that the development is in general conformance with the preliminary site plan that's attached to the staff memo. Staff's recommendation is for approval with the conditions just mentioned. That concludes my report. I know that the applicant and the architects are present as well if you have questions for them.
Thank you, Mr. Garcia. Any questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Fell?
I should probably know this, but in the B3 district, by rights, can you park over a front yard setback?
You can, as long as it's screened. So you can park up to 10 feet into the required 15-foot front yard setback, and I believe This is right at that, right at that 10 feet.
Okay. This may be more a question also for the architect. Can you review their parking count? It's really hard to read on the sheet.
Okay. Yeah, I have reviewed it, and they did. I know the numbering is a little odd, but you see they count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Can you go to the little chart?
Oh yeah.
How
Okay.
do we get 0.7 of a space, 7/10 of a space? One vendor requires 7/10 of a space. How do we get there?
Yeah, that's correct. So we recently, if you'll recall, well, this was probably several months ago now, we did our omnibus text amendment, and we, the way it all played out is that the reduction in parking for one-bedroom units, the council approved bringing that down to 0.7 spaces per unit. So you multiply your total number of single-bedroom units by 0.7, and then, of course, you round up to the next whole number.
Any other questions for Mr. Garcia? Mr. Trail?
So, where are you suggesting a screening wall?
Yeah, that's a good. So maybe it's best if I just go to the elevations, because that'll be. Okay, so here's an elevation from the north. So we would just, there would be, let's see, well, maybe that's not so great. It's kind of hard to see on elevations like that. So, for instance, on this image here, this would be walled in as opposed to being on stilts. Well, sorry, not walled in here because that's an access drive. But there'd be, I assume there'd be a wall here and a wall here and then some sort of a wall over here, just to help screen the parking that's under the building so it doesn't look, because you see it looks open over on this side, and that's just not. And,
Not surrounded by parking. I mean, what does the wall underneath do?
Well, I mean, hopefully over time, when the area is redeveloped over the decades, better, more aesthetically pleasing buildings are built, and it's not just a sea of asphalt.
You
So
don't think this one's an aesthetically pleasing building?
I didn't say that. I'm just saying.
Sorry.
I'm saying the Taco Bell parking lot next door might not be the most aesthetically pleasing parking lot, if that's a thing.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay.
Any further questions? No? Thank you, Mr. Garcia.
Thank you.
I'll outline the rules for a public hearing. The petitioner may address the commission and present reasons why we should rule in their favor. Any proponents of the proposal will then be heard. Opponents can then be heard. Others who wish to address the commission on this case will then be heard, and then if needed, the petitioner will have a chance to come back for final arguments, and then we'll close the public input and have discussion and possibly vote. So if the petitioner wants to address the commission, feel free. You don't have to either. No? Is there anyone in favor of this that wants to speak to the commission? Is there anyone opposed who wants to speak to the commission? Anybody else who wants to speak to? Please.
I just have a question.
Sure, come on up there and then just state your name for the record. And sign the paper there if you could.
Sign the paper.
Yeah.
My name's Christine Gunther, and I own the building directly behind where this building's going to be built, at 1010 West Clark. And so my question is, will there be any improvements to the alley that's behind the new building and between our
Right,
building?
yeah, and that is one of the entry points to the proposed
Right.
structure.
That alley could really use some improvement.
I
All the way
can't-
from Harvey to Gregory.
I can't speak to that. I don't know if Mr. Garcia can or not.
Yeah, I know that alley's in pretty bad shape, and if I recall correctly, I think that the applicant was willing to contribute to improving that alley in some way, or am I totally wrong in that? I may be wrong. Okay. Then there are no improvements that are planned at this time.
What about by the city? I mean, is it, who's
It-
responsible for the alley?
Well, it would be the city's.
Well, yeah, ultimately, it's
be
the city.
city's responsibility. Yeah.
Any opportunities to get that alley improved?
Well, you know, I would hope so. We don't have any say over Public Works, but you've noted it for the record, and so it will be considered by the city council. And if you come back and make the same point to them, there would be a chance that something could be done.
Okay, that'd be
So-
great. Okay, thank you.
All right,
Okay.
thank you.
Thanks.
All right, anybody else? Nope. I think we're done then with the public input portion of the hearing. So now we will close the public input and have discussion. Any discussion? Mr. Trail? Oh, Mr.
I have a
Phelps.
city staff question. What's the car stacking rule behind a drive-through in Urbana?
So it depends on whether you are just a normal, well, whether the drive-through is for fast food or just a regular, like a bank or something. And the rule for fast food is that you have to have 90 feet from the drive-up window, which means essentially you have to have space for 5 cars. Initially, when this was proposed to us, they were trying to build a building that Nero's could go back into, but because of the stacking and actually because of the parking requirements, for any type of restaurant, even fast food, you would require 10 more parking spaces than they have here. They just weren't able to make it work with a fast food, or with, allowing Nero's to go back in there. So while this looks like a drive-through, it's not, the intent right now is not.
I was kind of
to
more
have.
driving at if they decide to put one in, is there a problem?
Well, if they wanted to put one in, then they'd require variances for, for that stacking lane and perhaps others.
Mr. Trail?
I guess my big question is in this area, why is the building in the back with a tiny parking lot in front of it? Why isn't the building toward the street to help the long-term, idea of cutting down the idea that you're on a highway when you're going down University? And you're going to have cars, sounds like, really squeezing up to street side as it is, which is usually something that in most areas is considered to discourage pedestrians. That pedestrians generally feel that when there's cars parked right up to the street, they're not supposed to walk there. Why not put the building in the front instead of in the back?
That's more a question for the architects, so if they can speak to that, they're welcome to.
The gist of my question, why I asked you, is because the way the building is built, it almost looks like it was designed to have the parking in the back because it's got the drive-through. I'm just wondering if it was moved to the front because the city requested it, or?
The city did not request that.
Ms. Billman?
I actually prefer it this way. I don't like it when buildings are right up on the sidewalk, so I like it that it's set back. I mean, a parking lot is not particularly attractive, but I just feel crowded in by buildings right on the sidewalk.
Mr. Trail?
It depends on how close they let them put it to the sidewalk. You usually want, especially along a 4-lane road, more than certain other buildings have been allowed to build. So it's
So is that 5 feet?
which honestly seems like a ridiculously small area next to a 4-lane.
5 feet from the
State
sidewalk,
road,
so
yeah.
another, a few feet from there. And there will be a wall, so the cars shouldn't be exposed, but. Aye.
Correct. There'll be landscaping required
Landscaping, okay.
in the front.
No, okay, position of the wall again, just for my,
Sorry, so on the site plan in front of you, you see essentially where the dotted line is around the building?
there's dotted
Oh.
lines all the way around.
Thank you, Lori.
Great. Okay. But so the front will be open then with landscaping?
Correct.
Okay. Mr. Trail?
Can you describe the requirements that the landscaping along the front is going to have to meet?
Yeah, our landscaping requirement is 1 tree and 3 shrubs for every 40 feet of linear frontage or fraction thereof. So there's going to be some trees and some shrubs.
Thanks.
Is there,
Mr. Turner?
I also have the same thought in terms of why is the building not up closer to the street rather than in the back?
Yeah, can you come up and address that?
Yeah, please do. Sure. Yeah. And just state your name and sign a paper, Mr.
I have the
Saunders.
same question.
Yeah, Chris Saunders,
Yeah.
Green Street Realty. I am the future potential property owner here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, a lot of questions you're talking about. All this design was based around the parking requirements right now in Urbana. We did a similar building at Fifth and University, just in Champaign. Very exact same size lot just a couple of years ago. We have a total of 17 parking spaces there with 52 bedrooms, and we've got a 4,000 square foot insurance agency in the bottom of it. 100% occupancy, no issues. In this particular zoning, we were hoping that you have a definition of what's called food service and restaurant use. In food service use, I believe we've determined it's 7 parking spaces are required, and in restaurant use, it's 30. And I believe there's no, when talking to Mr. Garcia and their staff, there is no definition for food service currently in the code, so we're erring on the side of 30, which means I need 50-some parking spaces on 17,000 feet. Makes it impossible. And, you know, Nero's wants to go back in this space on the bottom, but we can't make it work with the stacking, and we certainly can't get their parking. So I'm at a point right now with Nero's, I have not informed them of this yet, but they will not be able to be a tenant there, really, under any circumstance. So we're kind of back to just our space below will just be whoever we can get in there that would accept the space with no parking. It won't be a restaurant. It'll likely be maybe an office space. So to answer your question, Mr. Trail, we could pump the building all the way to the front now. It's not, this was done, and Mr. Turner, specifically to try to get Nero's or a restaurant back into the space, but that is really seemingly impossible with the parking requirements. And even going under, it wouldn't make financial sense to go underground here, and you wouldn't be able to turn and get all the spaces in anyhow. So we tried to buy the university lot next door from the foundation, and they were not willing to sell that. So we are kind of just, we've got a nice residential portion above, but we are really kind of out of ideas on how to make the drive-through stacking work or anything else. So the parking requirements are definitely a huge, in this particular case, Nero's business, I think they told me 95% of it is drive-through. They've got, they don't need 30 parking spaces to have walk out, they get a few walk-in customers, but we don't know what to do. The other issue with screening, and Mr. Fell, as an architect, would probably tell you, we've talked about this, is screening this, we're going to eliminate parking. And once we eliminate parking, we're going to eliminate our capacity to get even 44 beds, because you can't just drop walls in everywhere. You're going to take parking spaces. So we've kind of got to redesign that first floor kind of all together. The concept's the same. We want to have a retail space in the bottom, 4 stories of apartments. And I know this approval's about asking for residential above. But yeah, I would consider, the parking thing again. I know it's been talked about in the past, and I think we've have other properties that have shown that less parking works in this particular type of area with all the walking traffic. Even the 0.7 on the 1 bedrooms helps, but if it's rounded up to the next full parking space, it really is not much of a difference. So, yeah, parking's the reason why this was all designed this way.
So are you saying you would consider moving that to the front then, potentially, if,
Yeah, I think if we can move it to the front potentially now, because we're going to eliminate the idea of anybody pulling off University and probably visiting a restaurant or, going through a drive-through, because I don't know if it'd be a vape shop or I don't know what it'll be. I don't know what'll be in there. It'll be somebody that doesn't need any parking, because we don't have any. We don't need that much tenant parking, but we need a ton for, we envisioned a restaurant all along, being in this spot, but it doesn't appear that's going to be possible.
Mr. Hopkins?
I'm going to behave as if we are back in public hearing.
Permission,
rather than-
yeah, sure, we essentially are.
So, for a special use permit, we're generally going to approve something that says substantially as
Yeah.
presented. My impression from your point of view is that you might want something different from what is presented. But the key issue is we have to approve residential use. So, I guess maybe this is partly a question for staff. I don't know whether we can send one message, which is mixed use is okay, without trying to approve a site plan or a configuration, because if it seems in flux. But then a second question. As I think it's Jim Webster, who owns Lincoln Square, was quoted in the News Gazette on Sunday, with Carl building 600,000, have I got that right? Office
Out of town.
space at Clark at the Field, or Carl Fields. And having seen the attempts to rent office space in the university-built garage to the west of you and to the university-built building on the corner of University and Lincoln, is office rental actually viable?
I would say it'd be difficult to find an office tenant. It's a small space. I mean, I think the easiest thing is to define food service in the code in Urbana, and then this is done. Then we just ask for a variance on the drive-through, and Nero stays right there, and we've got 30 spaces, and we move on down the road. But erring on the side that there is no food service definition, but then erring the highway and go, okay, we need 30 spaces is, because there's not a definition. I don't, is that correct, Kevin? I couldn't remember. I think there was not, it was not defined. Food sales, yeah, food sales.
Well, I think what was not defined was, in our parking table, we don't distinguish between different types of, we don't distinguish between fast food and a sit-down restaurant. I think that was the big issue that, that we had as staff in order to define what Nero's is. We just have to fall back to restaurant,
Yeah.
because that's what's in the parking use table.
We submitted this originally with the 7 spaces as food sales, and that's why we didn't, until we got the answer that it wasn't gonna, we couldn't go find 27 spots. We tried. We actually tried to get in the giant university lot there a parking agreement, which sounds like would be, the city would allow for residents, but I think the parking there was, I think it was $900 a semester. So that just wouldn't work. So we got kind of back to square one with, we've got this thing drawn with Nero's in there. We're going to do apartments above it. It's going to be, call it a 2,000 square foot lower level commercial space of some kind and 4 stories of apartments. We we would have done 5 stories of apartments, but we can't fit the parking in there. But yeah, the restaurant piece is a big, I think it's too small of a lot to do a planned unit development. From my understanding, it's got to be a half acre. We've only got 0.4 of an acre here. So we're kind of in definition mode of what food sales are, and if somebody could determine what that is, then we can make this kind of work, I think, as presented.
Do you have something else, Ms. Shaw?
That's all the questions I've got.
Okay, great.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for coming back up.
Sign in.
Yes, thanks.
You're welcome.
Okay, I'll reclose the public input and continue back to discussion. Mr. Hopkins?
So following up on what I've just said, I would actually also say I prefer it back to forward. And for 2 reasons. There is a whole lot of unrentable, or at least unrented, first floor, up at the curb, office space along University Avenue already. And I think the likelihood that this first floor could be rented is increased both if the parking is in front, because that keys people on a auto-oriented street, which University Avenue is our auto-oriented street, that there's business there as well as something else. So I would make that comment. The second, which is in a way related to that, is if we can say somehow, yes, there's not a problem putting residential over commercial on University Avenue, but this, in its current context, is not something that can be built substantially as shown. I think that's what I would like to be able to do. And I don't know there's a way to do that. In other words, I would like to keep this going,
Mm-hmm.
but I'd like it to be able to take advantage of trying to work out some of these details and make it possible to do something that might actually succeed.
So for me, as I understand it, the question, I'm sorry.
Mr. Ackerson,
Thank you. Sorry for that.
jumped the gun there.
I did. Just off the top of my head.
All right, that's all right.
So as I understand it, though, the issue before us is whether we're going to allow the mixed use. So
That's the
si-
special use permit, yeah.
Special use permit.
With the
So
condition
Yeah,
of the site plan.
right. And so I see some good arguments both ways. I was initially thinking the same as you, that it would be better if it's closer to the front. But I think the overall proposal is a good one. I think it's a crying shame they can't keep the business that's there within their plan because of parking. Just throw my 2 cents in. I think that it's a shame if parking is what's getting in the way of keeping an existing business and then growing residential. I think that's a problem. But given that we have a fairly good plan and in an area that could use some residential, it's in high density, it's in close to the university. I like the fact that it's on the south side of university as opposed to all those apartments we got way up, Neal and other places. I think all of these fit into what we're trying to do close to campus. So I don't want to hang it up based on where we might, whether we think the building ought to be further north or further south. I think, unfortunately, the business owner's got to figure out how to make it work within the parking constraints and what else there is. But I don't see any major problems with the site plan or with the use that's proposed.
Mr. Garcia?
Sure. I think the reason that we generally use that site plan, must generally conform to the site plan, is just because that's a way to make sure that, that a developer is doing the things that were discussed at the public hearing. I wanted to point out that that's just one of many conditions that can be used. So if you go to page 3 of your memo, the first condition is that you can regulate the location, extent, and intensity of such uses. So I think if you wanted to give them flexibility on where to actually put the building, you might instead have a condition that says we're okay with the number of units you're proposing. So you could approve the residential use, say up to X amount of units or something like that. And maybe building height, things like that, but then give them the flexibility to, say, move the building to the north side of the property if they chose to do that.
Mr. Fell?
Is approving this with the general conformance to the site plan negate them being able to get a variance, for instance, for the number of stacking cars? Could we approve this, and they could go ahead and get a variance to put a restaurant back in? Or is that not in general conformance with the site plan?
I think that would be in general conformance with the site plan, because they have the drive-through lane there. And so they could seek that variance in the future. I mean, this is probably a pretty good site plan to allow them to do that.
Anything further? Ms. Billman?
Well, first of all, I hope they don't move the building towards the street. I just have to put that plug in. But what is the timeline for building this? Just curiosity.
We would start this fall and have it delivered next school year, is the plan.
So, in case that you couldn't hear that, that would be start construction in fall of 2018 and finished by August of 2019?
Yes.
Anything further? Further discussion? No? Ms. Yu?
Yeah, I have a question about just overall the exterior of the building. Is that regulated in any extent?
There's no design overlay in this particular zoning district.
Okay.
So they could make it look how they want to. And I've watched green grow, and some of those are very attractive, and some, trust them to do the best they can, because you want to have an attractive building to attract tenants.
So is it going to be looking similar to the one on like Fifth and University, the one you are mentioning, Chris? Is that the idea, to get something similar?
Yeah, it's going to be very similar. We have 4 stories of residential there, and the first floor of retail. Parking is a lot, there's not many parking requirements there, so we've got a lot less, over half the parking we have here. So it made it a lot easier to design.
Yeah.
We could design it with parking behind and in front, which is what we prefer, but in this case, we kind of got to fit a parking space everywhere on the site, and we got to figure out how to screen it and not lose a space. So you end up with a building that looks like it's on stilts, which it is. We can't fit parking any other way.
I don't think I can repeat all that for the record. Come up again, please. Try to think of your questions whenever. Thank you.
What was your question again? Sorry.
Actually, you answered a question. You answered. Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to restate it.
For the record. Yeah.
For the record, my question is that is the intention of building this similar to the one you built on Fifth and University, just in terms of overall look of the building, the siding, the color scheme, things like that?
Yeah, we've actually got this similar to that, but we would probably go with, we got a lot more glass on this one. In our initial plans was to do a lot of glass and mixture of products. We're not quite there yet because we've been struggling to figure out a little bit how we build it and, and get the tenants on the first floor we started with the first floor tenant and moved from there on the design. And since that first floor tenant is going to be more difficult, we are kind of back a little bit to square one on floor 1 and how we handle that. But we've got an idea of what we will do on floors 2 through 5, and it'll be very nice.
So,
We're not using vinyl siding.
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It'll be nice materials.
Mr.
Expensive.
Trail?
It will be expensive. as they all are.
Yeah.
So,
Something else for Mr. Saunders?
What's the expected lifetime of this building?
boy, good question. I would think a long time, you know, I mean,
The
we've got
American
building.
idea of a long time, and some other ideas of a long time can be different.
Yeah, I mean, I think we build them as good now as they, you know, there's a lot of codes involved in the construction side of things, on, you know, with the way we build them, and I imagine it'll be around a lot longer than any of us.
Speak for yourself. I'm going to be here a long time.
Maybe not.
Mr. Fell?
Yeah.
I have a staff, we have a staff question. Are they allowed to have a curb cut on the west side of their property? Another curb cut?
Well, there's currently a curb cut there, but they're showing it being closed. I don't think, are you talking on University Avenue?
Yes.
There's one there
Ah.
now, but it's more narrow
Yeah.
than the one that's shown on this plan.
Okay. I don't want to redesign their parking lot, but can I ask a question? Is it within the, I'll phrase it this way. Is it within the zoning ordinance for them to use that existing curb cut on the west, not have a exit from the west side of their parking lot that goes back to the alley and just use that curb cut as a straight shot down for their drive-through? So they have 134 feet of stacking space?
The window's got to be 5 feet, so give
them
I mean, just like a separate aisle just for,
Sure. Is that in general conformance with the site plan that we're looking at?
yeah, I suppose it could be. I mean, it's showing a pretty long, I don't know though, because closing the curb cut, I'm sure IDOT would be pretty happy to have a curb cut closed along University, but.
Is there a curb cut on the east side?
So
Yes.
the curb
Okay.
cut that you see in this plan is the one that exists. It's wider than the one that's there, or than the one that's to the west. And I think the one to the west is more central, but I can't be certain just
Okay.
looking at this.
Now, let me ask you a question.
Mr. Trail?
You're proposing, the gist of your dice is that they use the alley as an exit?
Yeah, they are
They
now.
already are.
They already
Yeah.
are.
My question is just reverse it. Why not use the alley for your stacking space? Then you can put the building at the front of the
Can't do
property.
that.
You can't do that.
No.
You can use
It's
it.
The alley is public right of
Yeah,
way.
public right away.
Nobody's using it, obviously.
You just heard from a neighbor that it's.
Yeah, no, that's,
I'm trying to find a way that, we don't yet again end up proposing, approving something that was designed primarily for cars instead of people. I mean, we just keep doing this over and over.
That's a change to our zoning ordinance.
Mr. Hopkins, are you?
I want to come up with a motion.
Okay.
Um,
You want to fiddle with some language?
And I'm probably going to need help.
Yeah.
But I'm going to move that we send line case 2343 SU 18 to City Council, the recommendation approval with the following conditions. That the site plan achieve the standards and conditions of the zoning ordinance, screening, and parking, that the residential be permitted at the proposed number of units and building height, and that the commercial space be in a configuration that could enable a variance for a restaurant fast food use. I'm not sure what all I said, but I think that's it.
I'm writing as fast as I can.
Are we seconding or discussing?
That motion by Mr. Hopkins. Go ahead, second, then we can
I'll
go and
second.
discuss it. Second by Mr. Fell. Further discussion?
Staff question? With the way Lou worded this, are they precluded from getting a variance that,
No, I
you
think,
know, so they're either, like, for instance, the number of parking spaces so they can get a drive-through? That's why I make sure if they want to go get a variance to tweak something on their site plan that isn't in the zoning ordinance, they can still do that.
That was certainly, I thought I
So you're
said to
trying to say-
enable them to get a variance.
But that was just for the restaurant, not for
the-
instance,
for the-
stacking spaces. That's not, so, any variance.
Well, my intent was any variance, such as the parking, the stacking, the setbacks, the screening, sufficient to enable a restaurant use. And what that might require, I'm trying to avoid
Specifying.
proscribing,
Yeah,
yes, specifying, because a second right turn only street entrance could actually be one way to make it possible. So I'm trying to, and to now speak to the, the issue, part of my concern is we've got a lot of space available to rent that we are, in effect, encouraging people to build, and we can't rent it.
So let me do a couple things here. Mr. Garcia, did you have a point?
I did not. I was just.
Oh, we're stretching. First let me read what I thought you said. So this is well, let me clarify which one of these conditions this applies to. So are you proposing that we keep conditions 1 and 2 and substitute the wording that I'm going to read for condition 3?
No, I was not suggesting that we keep any of the current conditions. I was replacing all of them.
Okay. Just wanted to clarify that. All right. Okay, so here's the wording, or close to it. The site plan achieves standards and conditions of the zoning ordinance, screening and parking requirements. Residential use complied with zoning, something and in regard to something at building height.
Would you like me to give it a stab?
Sure.
Okay.
I need to use shorthand or something.
I guess we could start it with that the site plan achieves the
Yes.
standards and conditions of the zoning ordinance, screening and parking requirements. I took that as a parenthetical.
Sure.
That the residential be permitted at the proposed number of units and building height,
There you are.
and that the commercial space be in a configuration that could enable a variance for a restaurant/fast food use. Is that close to what you said?
Sounds about right.
The gist, improved, I'd say.
And that replaces all 3 of the conditions in the city staff memo. Ms. Billman?
Does this mean they wouldn't have to follow the landscape plan or the,
Well, no, it says, the way it was worded, they'd have to follow the zoning ordinance in regard to screening and parking, so there's required screening.
Well, regardless, you need to follow the zoning
Correct.
ordinance unless
That's
it's
right.
varied. Sorry.
Yes. What I was, yeah, what I was trying to get at is that there are a set of standards and such to reference from, but there are also variances. And it seems reasonably clear to me that to get a likely rentable commercial space, variances might be in order.
Mr. Ackerson?
So I'm just wanting to clarify, because that sure sounded like a good draft of a proposal to me. but the way it's worded, it would encompass what's in 1 and 2 as far as landscape, buffering, screening from view, because I don't know if the wall would be in there.
That was not the intent of the, Mr. Hopkins. That's my understanding.
Okay, so what would there, but there are requirements for screening and buffering, right? Okay.
Sure, my understanding, if I'm wrong, my understanding of the zoning ordinance, if they're just going to follow the zoning ordinance, we're not going to get more specific. The landscaping, there is a landscaping requirement. I don't think there's a wall requirement, so. So that one would no longer apply.
Can I make a
Mr.
proposed, if instead of commercial space, if you just say site plan under that third point, then it would be all the stuff before, and the site plan be configured in a way to enable variances for restaurant or fast food use.
Good.
Do you want to formally amend your motion? Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, just a second.
It's friendly, it's a friendly.
Could I ask for one other thing while we're amending?
We're writing in real time is what we're doing,
Yeah.
so.
Oftentimes, things are proposed with an approximate number of units or approximate building height, so I wanted to ensure that perhaps there might be some flexibility built in there should they need to reconfigure things. So instead of, X number of one-bedrooms, it's Y number of one-bedrooms, just so that it doesn't mess them up and make them come back here to increase things by 1.
So the words we usually use are substantial agreement with the
Substantial
current proposal.
compliance, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, makes sense. Anything further on this? Further thoughts? Mr. Turner?
Do we want to make sure that there is a wall that screens underneath parking? So it doesn't look like a building on stilts. Yeah, I know that's the intent.
Yeah.
Uh,
Mr. Hopkins?
I purposely left it out.
Yeah.
And I purposely left it out for 2 reasons. One is, it's not clear to me that a wall in the configuration implied increases security. If you notice where the residential entrances are, I think the wall is actually problematic. I prefer the notion that we can design good columns. That is, we could design columns that look better than walls. And so I think sometimes when we put walls around things, we create problems. We think we're keeping, what are you trying to do? You're trying to keep people from seeing. I don't think that's always, or in this case in particular, because of where the stairways are. They're in the back. So anyway, from when I wrote, when I
So it's
spoke the motion, I purposely did not make that a requirement. Now, if it fits in, low walls, buffers of headlights, there's lots of things you can do.
Okay, anything further on this? Mr. Trail?
Absent the pre-existing restaurant, would we be doing this? We're bending over backwards to try to allow a drive-through.
Yeah.
If the current tenant of the property wasn't this particular restaurant, would we still be doing this?
My logic has nothing to do with Nero's. It has to do with us, in effect, requiring somebody to build what I consider an almost unrentable first-floor office space. That we would rather have somebody rent an office space somewhere else that's already vacant.
I will
So
note too that
Food
Nero's.
service
Sorry.
is a better market use on University Avenue of the first floor than vacant, papered over windows, university, low on the totem pole offices stuck under parking garages, uses, which is what office space along University Avenue.
Yes.
Mr.
Well,
Trail?
At least part of the reason for that, I think, is because they're wanting them to put in essence, walk-up businesses, but doing absolutely nothing else to encourage walking traffic. And I think, to the more we encourage drive-ups, you're never going to make the tip over. That's why I asked about how long the building is going to be around. If we design for things where it's got to be drive-ups and cars and we're going to have no pedestrian traffic, we're stuck with those decisions for the next 40, 50 years perhaps. I mean, to some degree, look at, when you start to get enough residential in an area, now the catchment area for businesses that might have relied on drive-through before can now start relying on walk-up. So, I think we're all, I think there is some people like pedestrian-friendly areas, that we want more residential in this area. We expect more pedestrians, but unless we keep pressing on, foot on the accelerator with the idea of we want to make sure everything is pedestrian-friendly and geared toward that, we're never going to make it. Because if there's one thing that discourages pedestrians, it's a lot of things like, this.
Mr. Ackerson?
Yeah, so my thought was, sure, yeah, if you could keep a local business, that's great. But actually, my thinking was pretty much like Lou's, was that if you look at the area and what's a real most likely use, some kind of food, restaurant, drive-through, whatever, is the most likely use for that area, and you've got a lot of high-density residential, so rather than people driving all over town to get it, it's right there. I think the problem is that a little small mom-and-pop restaurant where they can go sit down is going to require more parking because of our regulations about parking. So I think the problem comes back to parking. But for my own, I'm just chiming in on my own two thoughts, are whether it's Nero's or not, I think that food service is a much better fit, or some kind of restaurant is a much better fit there than all the empty, office space. Now, there may be other kinds of businesses that could occupy that space, I don't know, but I'm very familiar with that area of campus, and food is one of the biggest draws around, in addition, along with residential.
I want to note as well, Nero's has not entered into a lease agreement. We've only discussed their interest in going back in there. So that's, we would like that. It would make some sense. But, if this is really market-driven stuff, a restaurant that would go in there that needs a lot of parking is not going to go in this space. This is gonna be a national restaurant that requires 40 or 50 parking stalls would not rent in this building. So I think it's going to be market-driven again. We're not out looking for anybody else right now. We're hoping Nero's would work out. But if they don't, we will find a tenant for the space that fits in over there, that wants to be there, and we can go through the process with Kevin and his staff on requesting variances if we need them. Also, I would be more than happy to take first floor residential, if you would rather do that, because we'd rent that, and it wouldn't be empty. But again, parking, my opinion, obviously, I'm building a lot of stuff in the community, Urbana included. My opinion is your current developments are all driven by parking, 100%. They're not driven by pedestrian walking and biking and being on buses. This is 100% driven from the aesthetics to the number of beds, number of units, by your parking requirements. And somewhere along the line, I know that Champaign's going away from parking altogether. Sounds crazy, but I think what Champaign has done is let the developer decide what they need for parking. And, if a developer's, in my case, I do have a development with 15 more beds than this. We have 0 parking spaces. 901 South 4th Street, 4th and Daniel. We don't have one single parking space on a 7-story building, and we have 2 apartments left for August to lease, and we have a commercial tenant with 3,000 feet on the first floor. Would I propose doing no parking in this location? Absolutely not. But I think the parking we start with parking, architects, and when there's parking requirements, and work backwards and design a building, we run out of space. You know, that's the reality. I don't have a good answer for it. I know there's opposition to parking for whatever reason, but in this kind of location on a University Avenue with the traffic, the cars, you know, 400 or 500 kids across the street, multiple apartment buildings within walking, I mean, thousands of kids within walking distance, staff, to have all this parking. If you look at the university lot that is next to this, I mean, it's an acre of empty parking. And, you know, I think Campus Circle, we called Campus Circle, I don't know how many parking spaces Campus Circle had, but they thought they'd have 120 left available for us to lease if we needed them. And they went off the one to, you know, half space per bed, parking requirements, and they've got a parking deck. So, again, that's my 2 cents. I'm excited to do the development, and I'll work around, you know, we understand the parameters right now. If they were to change, we'd probably give you a lot better building, but we're going to give you, you know, a good building either way.
Thanks.
We got a motion.
We got a motion on the table, so I think we've pretty much talked through it. Thanks
Thank you.
for
Thanks.
indulging us this unorthodox process that we had tonight. But I think I'm ready to, for us to have a roll call vote.
Actually, I have a question. Can we vote separately on the amendment?
Actually, it's not an amendment. It's
What's
a,
the amendment?
The proposed amendment.
it's it's not an amendment. It was part of the original motion. The condition was part of the original motion. Yeah.
Ms. Spillman,
Yes.
Mr. Fell,
Yes.
Mr. Fitch,
Yes.
Mr. Hopkins,
Yes.
Ms. Wadrago,
Yes.
Mr. Trail, Mr. Turner,
Yes.
Ms. Yu,
Yes.
and Mr. Ackerson.
Yes.
That motion passes. And do we have a date for the city council?
May 21st.
May 21st. Great, thank you. So we don't have any new business. Does anybody wish to address the Plan Commission on a matter that's not this case that has to do with planning? No? So we have no audience participation. Do we have a staff report?
We do not.
We don't have a study session. Therefore, we are adjourned.